Welcome and thank you for joining us this morning. Today we've assembled a panel of experts to discuss addressing the skill gaps in cell and gene therapy manufacturing in Canada. Prepare to face new challenges. Okay, we have to work on the grammar on the title, but we've worked it out in the rest of the presentation. So hang on a sec, let me just go to the slide. So I'm Bob Hanna, I'm the founder of Green Ascot Technologies. My background is in business development, training, and capability development, originally in the tech sector for companies like Oracle, then in supply chain for outfits like FedEx, where I cut my teeth on cool and cold chain. I consult on and develop learning and communication technologies, and I'm an occasional associate professor for Warwick Business School and University of Glasgow's master's programs. I'm currently a student at the McGill HEC Montreal's Executive MBA program, and training in your sector is the subject of my final paper. So I'm as eager as anyone here to listen to today's presentations. The goal for our session is to provide insights on how this important challenge has been addressed. What's needed for adequate preparation and qualification to advance your projects towards commercializations where the future of CGT training lies. Today, we're specifically addressing skills and qualifications required for the production of cell and gene therapies under good manufacturing processes. This is a booming field with tremendous projections of over 22% compounded annual growth rate, and it's expected to reach a value of over $35 billion globally by 2026. That's just around the corner. So demand is outpacing supply, and now this situation has been exacerbated by a talent shortage. Earlier in my career, I went through Y2K. This is not unique to your sector. This has happened before, so there's a lot of lessons perhaps to be learned from there. We need a solution to the talent crisis right now, especially if Canada is to remain competitive and flourish as a world leader in CGT. Today, we're going to get down to business and discuss the specifics of what we're doing to overcome this issue. It is with great pleasure that I introduce our expert panel to you. Many of you are already familiar with Jonathan Draper. After 10 years as a faculty member and principal investigator of a stem cell laboratory at McMaster University, in 2018, John made the move to become Stem Cell Network's program director for research and partnerships, and today he will discuss training for translation. Gail Piat, oh, sorry, I just see that the, yeah, okay, there we go. Gail Piat is manager of Alberta Cell Therapy Manufacturing, a GMP cleanroom facility at the University of Alberta. Gail hired the initial staff members when the facility was first opened, and will be hiring more staff in the near future. She knows firsthand the challenges of finding candidates who have the right mix of qualifications for GMP manufacturing of cell and gene therapy products. Gail will discuss working in an academic cleanroom setting. Christina Aon, who in previous roles was a learning business partner for GSK Vaccines Manufacturing, as well as a global learning director, now joins us as the Chief Learning and Business Development Officer at CellCAN Regenerative Medicine and Cell Therapy Network. Christina will give us a view of learning and development in the biologics industry. And finally, last but not least, Craig Hasselow, the Chief Scientific Officer at CellCAN, has been heavily involved in the training of HQP for manufacturing of CGTs. Both in his current role and having initialized 2 clinical cellular therapy programs for the treatment of type 1 diabetes, and as a co-founder for a biotech startup company. He will tell us how we are addressing the skill gap in CGT manufacturing, crafting the future. Without further ado, I would like to introduce you to the Stem Cell Network's Program Director, Jonathan Draper. Jonathan?
Thank you very much, Bob. Kind intro there. Thank you. So a little bit of what I will be talking about today. So I'm going to share some data arising from a recent training survey that SCN performed. I'm going to discuss a little bit about how academic skill sets correlate with non-academic careers. And also then I'll touch on how SCN is directing its efforts to assist in the training of HQP, or highly qualified professionals, personnel, depending on how you use that term. So a little, Bob's already touched upon, I have an academic background. I have 10 years as a faculty member, master under my belt. I trained undergraduate, masters, PhDs, graduated them as well. Postdoctoral level trainees. I also devised and taught courses. So I've got some experience in the academic training arena. In 2018, and as Bob alluded to, I moved to Stem Cell Network, and Stem Cell Network has the goal of translating science into broader ideas and applications that will benefit all Canadians. So this is really the idea of taking discoveries from the lab and moving them into clinical applications, into commercial products, and even actually into public policy as well, where possible. So this role has given me a little bit more of a global perspective, or I guess Canadian perspective, on the regenerative medicine ecosystem, including some of the training needs in this system as well. So onto the training survey. So in 2019, SCN commissioned and undertook a training survey to identify the career trajectories of SCN trainees. And at this point, I guess I should define an SCN trainee for you. So an SCN trainee is a highly qualified professional, HQP, who had attended or participated in an SCN-supported training program. And so since 2001, SCN has offered 7,000 training opportunities to around 3,000 trainees, SCN trainees. And this survey tracked 1,500 of these SCN supported trainees. The majority were PhD level students, graduates, and postdoctoral fellows. The study divided the trainees into cohorts, and you can see these cohorts listed here. So from 2001 through to 2019, the cohorts are broken down: 2005, 06 to 10, 2011 to 2015, and 2016 to 2019. And so when we look at the where trainees currently list their employment, you can see the majority are actually still employed in universities, hospitals, and research institutes. And probably a figure that many people are interested in is how many SCN trainees actually make it to become investigators. And in this situation, we identified that about 8%, just over 8% of trainees list professors as their titles. So that gives you some idea. It's less than a 1 in 10 chance that you'll become a faculty member, according to these data. Other titles that people were had as their employment roles in the academic environment were research associate or clinical research coordinator. You can see from this this pie chart that around 25% of trainees listed employment within the industry, so that would be biotech or private sector companies. And when we look at the breakdown there, we see that about half of those individuals are in early, so entry to mid-level roles. Approximately a third are managerial, and about a tenth are in the executive level. Interestingly, so about 80% of trainees are listed as Canadian citizens or permanent residents, and so that means about 20% are international. But we found that 82% of FSCN trainees are currently employed in Canada, are retained here. So that means that we're capturing about 10% or so of those international trainees as long-term employees within Canada. So this looks at employment sector trends, this slide, and you can see the most striking thing here is in the University Hospital Research Institute category, where you can see there's a general downward trend over the cohorts in those areas, and then there's this sharp uptick in the cohort 4, 2016 to 2019. And this could be explained by a number of different reasons. So recently, maybe more opportunities in universities, hospitals, and research institutes. Or older individuals from the other older cohorts may have moved beyond health research. And indeed, if you look at, for instance, the private sector companies and the government and legal, you can see there's a dip in the cohort 4 numbers there, perhaps supporting that. And when we break down the trend within universities and hospitals and research institutes, we see that actually quite strikingly, there's an uptick most recently in the number of trainees who are now employed within the hospital research environment, suggesting that maybe this emphasis on translational research, where often this is performed most frequently in hospitals and research institutes, maybe that's having an impact here, although we don't have data to clarify exactly why at the moment. So encouragingly, there's some good news about gender balance. As you can see over the duration of the study, the cohorts, it's generally equivalent. So it's in general 55%, fairly consistently since 2001. 55% of trainees are female. There is some gaps here, and a notable one, I noted that 8% of trainees list their title as professor. Of those, only 37% are women. So there's clearly some areas in which parity hasn't been achieved, and we really need to focus attention there. Outside of academia, you see the trends are equivalent generally, although if you look at roles in, for instance, biotech and pharma or government and legal, both of those have an overrepresentation of women, with at least 60% of women in those roles as well. So here, my very amateurish cartoon here of the route from academia to industry gives you perhaps a false sense of what this journey would be like. I think the route is not clear as I have drawn it, but it is actually probably shrouded in mist for many, and full of obstacles. And many of these are navigable obstacles in general, but they certainly exist there. And I think what's important from my discussions with those who work in industry is that there are many career options available to those who are diligent, hardworking trainees who have built good skill sets in their academic training. I think you have to set your expectations realistically when doing this. You're not going to be going into, even if you have a PhD, into a senior management level position. You are essentially going back into an apprenticeship, because, as I will outline, whilst your academic skills sets are a good solid foundation for what you may be able to offer in industry, there's still certainly some skill sets that are missing. Indeed, during about 2 years ago, when SCN was prepping for refunding through the federal government, we had conversations with Stem Cell Technologies, which is Canada's largest biotech, and they described to us their business plan to grow from 1,000 full-time employees up to 3,000 full-time employees over the coming years. And what they noted was that it was anticipated about 15% of these new hires would be in the research and development positions. But they also noted that many of the newly minted graduates who were coming through from academia lacked essential skills that would make them able to fill these roles easily. So this is a little bit of data from a qualitative industry survey. You can see that you may be able to recognize your academic skill sets would make you eligible for some of those skills that are listed in the postings, job postings. But there's so many there that you're probably not familiar with, or at least are not part of your normal roster of academic training as well. And while this survey looks a little bit dated, there was another recent one, 2018 Life Sciences Workforce Trends report that provided very similar outcomes, lots of roles that are not supported necessarily by the training you get in academia. And you can just do your own survey, go on to, for instance, the Blue Rock website and look at the job postings there, and you'll see that the job postings are listing things like quality control specialist or supply chain manager. These are things that are not really necessarily academic skill sets that you may have been given during your training there. So you do get a number of important skills as an academic, and these are your key to getting into industry. And so obviously you've got subject matter expertise, and this can be applied depending on the role you take. Technical skills, these are very important, having good up-to-date technical skills in basics such as PCR, that sort of stuff, but also, next generation sequencing, other highly, state-of-the-art skills that can be valued by industry in research roles. Critical thinking, this is super important. Your ability to evaluate evidence, data analysis, those sorts of things, that's a really important asset that you will be developing as you train. Prioritization and time management, these both really fall under sort of project management skills, really important assets, and you should be working carefully to evolve these skills as you're moving forward. And then we have communication and networking, and I think these are commonly underrated skills. Communication, verbal and written, are essential, and you should be working hard to make those skills, to develop them. Networking, this is your key to progressing in your career, and I can't underestimate the importance of this. It opens doors. It doesn't guarantee a position, but you should be capitalizing on your networks and building them at this point in your career as well. So with regards to industry, so you've already identified in that list a number of different skills, but project management, strategizing, costing, troubleshooting, risk management, those are all skills that you can develop now, and you can also seek alternative training through other means to sort of develop those as well. Intellectual property, how IP works and discoveries are commercialized, those are really essential assets. And GLP, GMP, GCP, these are laboratory manufacturing and clinical practice, good versions of those. Quality assurance and assay development, these are together, and I'm sure they'll be touched on by other speakers in this session. These are essential elements that are valued by industry because they are to do with rigor. And rigor is a very important component of industry, and I think is highly valued in that area. Regulatory roles are they were listed previously in the skill sets. So those are highly valued. And then business acumen as well. I think that is just an understanding of how things work. So flexibility, curiosity, passion for learning, creativity, communication skills, teamwork, comfort working with ambiguity, and the ability to work in matrix models where you have multiple managers. Those are all seen as essential skills as well. And so finally, I'll just very briefly touch upon so Stem Cell Network has training that they offer in a number of these areas that are meant to complement some of the skills that you're receiving. So advanced and scientific and core skills, there's RNA-seq biostats workshops. We've got a synthetic bio workshop, which is the applications are closing on Thursday, so do apply to that. Yesterday, we had the communications and leadership workshop, essential skills there, as I discussed. Commercialization and industry integration, we work with partners here to bring these, so clinical translation education group, we work with those frequently. And also tomorrow you should tune into BioTalent's breakout session in the morning. They have, we're going to be partnering with them, and they have a number of opportunities to develop those skill sets as well. And then finally, clinical translation. This is something that we do as well. So recently, best practices in therapeutic translation and navigating the regulatory steps in therapeutic translation workshops. Those are important skill sets, and you should be keeping an eye out on SCN's social media and website for upcoming opportunities in those areas as well. Bob, back to you. I think I've given a quick overview there. I hope I'm not over time.
Only a little bit, but it was well worth it. Thank you very much, John. No, I think it's much appreciated. And but look, what we'll do is what I'd like to propose. We've got a couple of questions for the audience in survey format that we'd like to put out. So I'd like to launch those right away if Vanessa can take care of that. And also open the floor. We've got time for a couple of quick questions to John. We'll have a second opportunity at the end of this presentation for you guys to ask anyone questions, including John. So are there any questions from the audience? And otherwise, I already have a question of my own. So like I said, it's the subject of my paper. So okay, I'm not sure if I'm looking in the right place, but I don't see questions from the audience right now. So I'm going to just jump into my question first, John, if you don't mind. One of the last presentation slides that you showed, you had the job listings, and it was referencing publication from 2013. I'm just wondering, it was the job listings graph that you showed. It was quite interesting, I thought, from a training perspective. And I'm just wondering, how do you see that evolving? How has it evolved in the last 7 years, and how do you think it's going to go for the next several years?
Well, I mean, COVID may change things in terms of how things evolve, so that's a difficult, maybe that's a separate question. But I'm pretty certain that tech is going to be a major feature. It has been in the way things are evolving. Comfort with new technologies, the rate of advances and acceleration in new technologies is only increasing. I mean, witness that of CRISPR, AI, iPSCs, organoids, sequencing technologies. Those are all important assets that I think are having familiarity with some of those, especially if you're retaining yourself within that an area which is in that R&D sphere. Those are going to be essential. So developing those skills and branching out above and beyond those of regular lab, Westerns and PCR and that sort of stuff, I think those are going to make you an attractive proposition. And I think maybe we'll be seeing, more computer modeling and less wet lab work, maybe in the longer term. I'm not certain exactly when that's going to be, but certainly there's a huge amount of information available now that can be used to simulate certain processes in labs. And so maybe some expertise in computer modeling is going to be an important aspect there as well. Okay.
Thank you. And do you can you forecast if the trend of almost half of your if the trend of almost half of your HQP landing in academia and research institutes will change as the Canadian CGT ecosystem flourishes as it has in the US? I mean, we could expect some substantial growth in coming years. Do you think that it's going to I guess it's the same. You're probably going to come back to the same question, but with COVID, it's difficult to forecast, right? So it's.
So I mean, COVID does make things a little bit difficult to understand exactly what's going to happen. How will science funding in Canada, will that be maintained in the longer term? I mean, the government is obviously looking at a larger deficit now. Hopefully, they're going to take the opportunity to build in areas that we have strengths, and certainly regenerative medicine is one of those areas, Bob. So I think that would be a great decision to do that. In terms of how things may change, it would be wonderful to see the regenerative medicine area expand, and we are seeing that. We're seeing some great, companies building their home here and having operations here. So Notch Therapeutics, Aspect Biosystems, Morphocell, Blue Rock. These are 10 years ago, when I was starting as a faculty member and making that decision about my career, there certainly wasn't those opportunities available at that point. So yeah, I think it's realistic that we do see some change in those trends. It would be great to see that happening soon. And I think we're really hopeful, and we're hopeful that organizations like Stem Cell Networks can help prepare trainees as they move into those careers.
Thank you, John. In the interest of time, we'll move to the next presentation. But before we do, I'd just like to share the results of the surveys. If I can ask Vanessa, I should push that, correct? Hang on a second. There we go. I'm just sharing with you guys the results of the surveys here. Interesting. And let's see. Oh, okay, you just pushed it. Very good. Okay. So I have another question for you, John, but I'm going to save it for the end, just in the interest of time. Okay. So
okay.
Now I'd just like to introduce Gail, manager of the Alberta cell therapy manufacturing, and she's going to present to us working in an academic clean room setting. Gail, are you ready?
Yes. Hey, thanks, Bob.
Thank you.
I'm going to give you a little bit of insight. Good morning, everyone. Hopefully into the world inside a GMP facility for manufacturing cell and gene therapies. I'm going to be talking about the key differences between working in an academic research lab and a GMP facility, the attributes of a GMP employee, some example positions, qualifications, and how even if you have GMP training and you don't end up working in a GMP facility, how that could potentially cross over and help improve the quality in the academic research lab as well. So first, just looking at some of the differences between working in a research lab and GMP is first, of course, just following the regulations, good manufacturing practice. And why do we follow those? It's mainly for reproducibility, predictability, and traceability. So we don't want to discover something new. That would be bad. We need control in a GMP facility. And so everything is rehearsed, it's orchestrated, and then it's performed. We don't want to discover something new or unexpected. That's for research. We have SOPs, so we follow detailed procedures exactly as they're written. If you don't follow them exactly as they're written, then it's a deviation. All of the work that you're doing when you're working in GMP is audited by quality assurance, and any findings are reported to management. So there's a lot of oversight that you might not be used to if you've been working in a research lab. All of the documentation is reviewed by a second person and by quality assurance. So even if you had a quality or a critical procedure, like if you were weighing something on a balance, you may have another technical person beside you that has to verify that you've actually weighed the correct amount. There's detailed record keeping that's archived for 25 years. So if you make a mistake, it is on the record for 25 years. Ongoing documented training requirements. You have to be trained on every single SOP every time it's revised, and you have to have ongoing GMP training. As I mentioned, there's deviations that have to be written anytime something unexpected happens, and then an investigation has to be conducted. Teamwork in a GMP facility is essential. You aren't doing your own independent research. It's not that you come in at the time of day that you want to come in and work as long as you want. You have to work with the other team members to get the project finished. So now some of the attributes of a GMP employee, of course, you have to be meticulous. You have to have a lot of attention to detail. You have to have the ability to even just work in a clean room environment. If you look at the person in this photo, they are dressed head to toe in a clean room suit. You're in a white room with a BSC humming all day for 7-8 hours. You have to be able to withstand that type of work environment. You have to have an interest in continual improvement, as I mentioned, following procedures exactly as written, and teamwork, and the ability to multitask, especially in a smaller academic facility such as ours, where there's more than one project going on at a time. And there has to be a lot of cross-training, and you have to be able to jump from one job to another and not just focus on one thing. Interest in equipment calibration and validation. Believe it or not, some people are interested in that. There's technical writing is huge because there's so many SOPs to write and reports, environmental monitoring and investigations. So now some of the examples of position types, like it's not all about just the production, although that's a key component in a GMP facility of actually producing the product itself. But there's also process development, and that's not GMP, but it's the step before GMP when you're taking that process that's been developed in the research lab and you're getting it ready for GMP. So if you're on more of the creative side, but you still like the translational part of a product, pathway, then process development might be for you, where you're optimizing or you're scaling up, or you're taking some manual procedures and automating them, or looking at all of the materials that are part of that process and making sure everything is GMP. There's QC testing, so that's when you're testing the product to make sure that you have actually produced what you said you're going to produce, so you have pass-fails for it to actually be released for the clinic. You have assay development and qualification and validation. That's a whole other stream. Equipment maintenance and CAL and validation, as I mentioned, computer validation, facility maintenance, and then quality control, or sorry, quality assurance. Quality assurance is not hands-on, it's an oversight role. So qualifications, educational background that's required for each of these positions is really position dependent. So if you're going to work in QC, obviously you would want to have a lot of analytical background in your experience and your education. Versus if you're in production, then you'd want to see cell culture and aseptic technique. And quality assurance, you really have to have a mindset for being able to audit and inspect and learn about the regulations and the standards. The previous GMP training and experience is obviously it's preferred. We don't always get it, but we do get some people in this field who have previous biotech GMP experience or pharmaceutical experience where they might not have the direct cell culture experience. So that's kind of a balance of deciding which is best to have. Is it the GMP experience or the hands-on experience? So our new hires, if they don't have previous GMP training, then, or even if they have, everyone still goes through our in-house GMP training, SOP training, hands-on training, competency training when required, and gowning qualification. So you actually have to prove that you're able to get those clean room suits on without contaminating yourself. So some of the I mentioned that some of the training that you might learn if you had GMP training and then you didn't get a job in a GMP facility, that it still may benefit you, even if you go and work in another lab, an academic lab or elsewhere. And so one of those benefits would be giving you that idea of beginning with the end in mind. So if you're working in a lab where you're hoping to get a product to the clinic one day, if you know what that process is going to have to eventually look like in a GMP facility, that would give you a better idea of choosing your materials or choosing your methods, and especially good documentation practices, like getting down enough of your data and your process so that you can transfer that eventually to process development and GMP. Technical writing is huge. If you're used to writing scientific papers, it's a lot different when you're writing an SOP or you're writing a report in GMP. So having those technical writing skills are key. And we've heard that from industry as well, is that a lot of industry is wanting new recruits to have a lot better skills in SOP writing. Project management skills, just figuring out, like I talked about multitasking and making sure that everything is planned in advance and rehearsed and there's no surprises. That can help in a research lab as well as just having those good project planning skills. Equipment skills, so troubleshooting equipment and calibrating it, making sure it's working correctly before you're producing that valuable data. Investigation skills. Nothing goes wrong in research, right? Well, of course it does. So if you have those investigation skills that we develop in GMP, that can help you in the research lab as well. Assay development and qualification. Well, maybe not the qualification part so much, but definitely developing new assays is done all the time in a research lab. So it's just learning about what are some of those important steps in that process, and just general regulatory knowledge gives you, again, that idea of beginning with the end in mind. And so that's it for me. Bob?
Yep. Thanks very much, Gail. That was a very clear presentation. I've got a few questions for you, but I will first, we're going to open up a couple of poll questions to the audience and see if there's anyone in the audience who would like to ask a question. But while we're waiting for that, I'll just go ahead and ask mine because I have to write that paper. So if you could give one piece of advice for academic trainees who are looking to launch a career in manufacturing CGT under GMP, what would it be?
Well, I think it would be doing some research first into, maybe thinking about, based on those different roles that I was talking about, which one interests you? Is it quality assurance? Is it process development? So really focus in on which position, and then try and find somebody that's already working in that position and talk to them, talk about what their day-to-day life is like working in that position, and then start getting training anywhere you can get it. And from more than one source is great. Just read.
Okay, thanks. And what are the greatest challenges that you face adapting new recruits with standard laboratory skills to manufacturing under GMP? It's quite a big shift, right?
It is. There's a lot of soft skills that are really, really important in GMP. You can have really good technical skills, but it's a shift. It's not, you have to give up that creative mindset of trying to, I'm just going to tweak something, to make it a little bit better. GMP means that you're going to do it the same way every time. And if you don't, you have to go through a change control process. So I think that's the biggest shift, is just realizing that everything is very regimented and transparent. It's all about traceability. Yeah.
And how do you find qualified HQP for your roles at your GMP facility? You're in Edmonton, right?
Yeah, we're in Edmonton. So I think one of the most successful ways we've found good recruits was through referrals, like talking to people and saying, do you know somebody that's worked in GMP or that has the skill sets required? Other than that, we just go by the, general advertising and interviewing, but really find that referrals help because it is such a different type of work than a lot of people are used to. And then sometimes they don't know what they're getting into until they're in it. So that's the biggest piece of advice I would give out there to trainees, is really do your research into these positions before you get into it.
Okay. I'm just going to share the results for poll question number 5, because we've got a good number of answers here. And let's see, I don't know if you're able to see it, Gail, but yes. The question was, for those of you working or who have previously worked in an academic GMP lab, how well did your academic degree training prepare you for the on-the-job skills required? And what we see is about 50% of people answered quite well. So not very well or completely, it's a little somewhere in between. Do you have any thoughts on that, Gail? Do you think there are things that academia can do to better prepare people for the real, for manufacturing?
Yeah, I think maybe some more regulatory and technical writing skills. Like I said, we really find that SOP writing, we have people with lots of experience and there's always something new to learn. So I think SOP writing and probably assay development and qualification, validation. Yeah, okay. I could probably make a long list. I think more training, more exposure in academia for sure would help people just have that baseline to start with. Great.
Okay. Well, I suspect we'll have some more questions at the end for you. Thanks very much for the presentation, Gail. But in the interest of time, I'd like to move forward to Christina's presentation now. So Christina is the Chief Learning and Business Development Officer at CellCAN, and she's going to present to us a view of learning and development in the biologics industry. Christina, are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, great. Take her away.
So thanks, Bob. So I'm coming at you with a bit of a different view. So I've never worked in academia. I've spent 20 years, or actually now 25 years in the industry. The last 10 were in vaccines for GSK, both here in Montreal and in Belgium. And so I'm going to give you a bit more of the perception of what the learning and development needs are in the biologics industry when you're looking at it from a manufacturing point of view. And so learning and development in the industry is actually quite the major responsibility. It's rigorous and it's non-negotiable. And if you consider the reality, the learning and development component is a major responsibility due to all the risk that's involved. The consequences of having poor training and development of the operations team, even if it's just a few gaps, can be very impactful on a company and not in a positive way. The risk of human error from a lack of knowledge can put the product and the patient at risk, and it becomes a quality issue. And this impact is overarching. So even if a production error is made and it has no impact on the product, you still need to write up a deviation, which means that your product then gets delayed weeks, months, and maybe never to reaching the patient if you cannot properly write up your deviation, if you cannot find your root cause, or if your product goes obsolete. If you actually think about it, it's documented that 1 in 5 batches in the biologics industry actually goes directly to the garbage due to mistakes. Most of them are what we call human error. And so 1 in 5, I mean, let that sink in, let the cost of that sink in, the time, the effort, and the disappointment on your team. And that in itself is a key aspect of why learning and development is so important. At the same time, you are putting the company's reputation at risk. So when something goes wrong, nowadays, these issues hit the news much more quickly. They go viral and they kind of live forever now. And it gives a very negative perception because people are very used to just reading the headlines. So they just read that this company has made this mistake, whether it's their trial has stopped, whether something has stopped, whether there's a shortage on the market because they're not able to release it because of an issue. People focus on that. And it puts a really negative connotation in people's heads. And then the last is really running afoul of the auditors. So the auditors will ask the person who's the fronter, so the person who accompanies the FDA on the learning and development topics, and they will ask them about the learning and developing aspects, what happens, how does it go? But it doesn't just stop there. They will actually ask people on the floor, what are you doing and why? And the auditors want to know that the people know why they are doing something. And very simply, if people can explain the why, then as the auditors explained it to me, they know that they can then make good decisions when issues come up, because issues do come up. It's never perfect. And they want to know that people can make these decisions. So I will move on to the next slide. So when we look at this, we have to ask ourselves, what's the core competency of biologics? And very honestly, it's not learning and development, and it's not even training. And yet it's where some of our biggest risks lie. And so the training component is so important. And you have to look and say, well, in a company, who owns this aspect? Is it operations? Is it HR? And it's a difficult question to answer because on one hand, you've got operations that has all the knowledge, all the technical knowledge that's required. And then you've got the HR, which may have some learning people involved that know how to develop training, how to develop modules, how to do all the logistics and all the setup. And the truth is, it's not a simple training, right? It's not just one of those trainings where you go and you attend and you check the box. And so it's to say, who is going to really take ownership of this? And how are we going to do this efficiently? And how are we going to do this in a cost-effective way? And the truth is, you also need to look and say, operations already is so busy. Anyone who works in the operations or manufacturing will tell you their days are already full, as well as HR. Can they take this task of learning and development on top of their existing duties and do it well? That's really something that needs to be evaluated. And so we'll go to the next slide. to look and see, well, in terms of learning and development in biologics, so what are the things that work? And the traditional method of training has people attending a training, they'll sign an attendance sheet, you'll ask the people to sit down to listen, they'll ask a few questions, and they'll get back to work. And this is what I call the check the box method. Check the box. And it kind of drives me nuts, to be honest with you, because it's a quick and dirty way of checking that training box, but you will end up paying for this later. You will end up paying for it because the people are not properly trained. They can't make decisions. They can't do problem solving. And so what happens is they end up waiting for the supervisor or the manager to make decisions for them. And then you have managers and supervisors who are so overworked and unable to do their own tasks that you end up getting a slowdown in your process. You end up with quality and safety issues when you really didn't need to if you had just done a proper learning and development from the start. And over the years, we've seen now that multinationals are pushing away from this because they've run afoul of the auditors, they've had product risks, they have 1 in 5 batches going into the garbage. And so they've really learned to say, okay, you know what, we need to break out of that, sort of check the box training mold and really look at competency and capability building. They need to know what capabilities do they have in their team to be able to do this process, and then determine what competencies do the people in my team need, what skills do they need to really be allowed to participate and make this process move forward. Now, what brings us to the question of return on investment. So the learning and development is not a light topic. It actually is quite time consuming. It can be costly, and it's necessary. It's something that is non-negotiable. We must have it done. And so how do we do this in an efficient way? And how do we make sure that the money and the time that we're putting in really is giving us the benefits that we need? And the easiest way to do this is to really look and say, how are we going to do this in a focused way? And from my experience and from all the benchmarking that I've done, competency matrices are really the way to do it, to look at each different job and say, what does this person need to be up and running? There's surveys that have been done, excuse me, that show that in the onboarding process lasts an average of 6 to 8 months. 6 to 8 months is a lot of time to get somebody up and running. When you hire somebody, normally it's because you need the person right there, right now. And so having somebody take 6 to 8 months to get up and running, to be able to participate and be part of the team is just too long. It has to really be done in a much more efficient manner. And focusing on competency building, focusing on a structured training program, focusing on a job curriculum to make sure that the person is learning what they need to know for their job, not everyone else's job, just their job. Gail mentioned before, if you're more interested in QA, if you're more interested in the operations, if you're more interested in the equipment maintenance, you need to have something that is really specific and designed for you. The last question of that, yes?
Sorry, Christine, I just wanted to ask you a quick question, but are you finished with this slide?
Not yet. So okay. Just one more thing. How do you make it cost effective? Because the learning and development is an ongoing process. And what we've seen is that it can become quite the hairy beast. If you have somebody in your company that moves from job role to job role, which very often happens, and their learning matrix is never cleaned up, if you're not really looking and if you're not starting from a structured, stable base to say, what does this person know and what does this person need to know? You can end up with somebody who gets put in a role where they have the potential to do it really well, but then we have gaps because nobody has really looked and said, do they have all the competencies necessary? So, Bob, yeah, you had a question for me?
Yeah, no, I was just wondering, against that background, how can a small team or a small, I mean, I notice a lot of biotech companies there's a lot of small outfits, and how do they fill complex roles, especially if the team is like, I don't know, only 4 or 5 or maybe 6 people strong?
So, I mean, that would be one of the key things. So I think that goes back a bit to The same question as Gail. So it would also be looking at what people have sort of in their background. And this is where, I guess I really can't stress it enough, having somebody who really has focused on their competency and not just, I've attended such and such trainings, but these are the skills I've acquired. And by that, what I mean is, this is what I know about this topic. This is what I can do when it comes to this topic. This is the knowledge and the insight I have on this topic. This is what I can perform. This is how I can problem solve on this topic. You really want to get people that are deep diving into these topics and not just sort of skimming the surface with these trainings. To be able to find these people, normally what we see is we see people that go from large multinationals where they may have had the chance to have done this, 1 job role, 2 job roles, 3 job roles. And then if they want to sort of, sometimes, in a big structure, you don't always get to have as much initiative. Like myself, I left from a much bigger structure to come to a smaller structure. You have a lot more freedom and a lot more ability to continue learning. And I guess in that point, I'm saying you're looking for people who want to be lifelong learners, because that's what you're going to need. The industry has changed. The FDA audits I attended in 2012 were very different than the FDA audits I attended, 8 years later. So it's something where you want to be finding people that want to be lifelong learners, that want to get this different type of knowledge.
Thank you.
Is that clear? Yeah.
Absolutely. Thanks.
So we talked about who owns the responsibility of learning and development. And sometimes you will find that there will be a learning and development person or a learning and development department that sits in HR in a large company. If you are a small company and you want to do it in-house, what do you need? So the truth is, unfortunately, your needs will be the same as a large company because the learning and development component is a very structured component. So you will need an instructional designer. So what is that? That's a person who designs your slides, who designs the learning methodology. You will want somebody who's well-versed in what we call adult learning principles and cold methodology and learning technologies. And if they can have a background in that field, well, that is really just the dream. Learning adult, so I'll take just an example, adult learning principles. Do you have people that are knowledgeable about this? It's not enough to say, I have somebody, we usually give the hat, I call it giving the training hat, to somebody who knows the process really well and who can explain it easily. And maybe that might be sufficient. But generally, as the processes get more complex, we will find that it is not. You also need a qualified trainer. So this is somebody who's qualified to deliver training to adults without irritation. And what do I mean without irritation? It's somebody who respects the adult learning principles. For those of you who are not familiar with them, there are 6 adult learning principles. And the theory behind this is that adults are guided by these 6 learning principles. If you want adults to learn something, you have to respect these principles. And the first one is that they are motivated and self-directed. So you have to have somebody who will let them pull on the learning rather than pushing information onto them. It has to be something that comes from them. The second is that adults bring a lot of life experience. So yes, somebody may be attending a training on environmental monitoring. However, they may have been doing environmental monitoring for 3, 4, 5, 10 years, whether it's for your company or at another one. And they may have a lot of knowledge to share, a lot of problem solving, a lot of troubleshooting. They may have questions about why things happened or why certain things were updated in technology. And if they're just made to sit there and listen, I can tell you that they're busy making their grocery list in their head instead of paying attention. The third is that adults are goal-oriented. So you need to give them a training that's relevant, that's now, that is designed to answer the problems that they have. Do not use your slides that, as you said, as Gail had mentioned, you've had a change control. So because you've changed part of your process, your slides need to be up to date all the time. They need to be relevant with examples that speak to people. I won't go through all the adult learning principles because I could do an hour on that, but it is something that's really important. Having a subject matter expert that has sufficient time, that's key, sufficient time. What subject matter expert do you find in production that has sufficient time? But that can help decomplexify the topic, that can give analogies, that can make the complex information simple for the instructional designer to design and simple for the participants to learn and digest. You need a learning management system. So we call that an LMS system. It's a tracking system that tracks all your participants. Have they attended the training? When did they attend it? When did they attend it? Did they do their qualifications? Did they pass their qualifications? When are they scheduled to attend the next session? And so on. And these are documents that you will show to auditors. So it's not just, people would like to do it in Excel. I can tell you, even if you're small, you might as well just start with an LMS system, a very simple one, because you will need to show it to auditors. And you will need something that is really bespoke and that is simple for the user to use. You might need a logistics team, because the truth is, if you've ever organized any type of training event, it's not easy. Signing people up, having them attend, coordinating between the trainer, the room, the learners, the supervisors of the team, and then logging everything into the LMS system. And then you need what's called a learning person. So a learning person is what I've done in the past. It's the person who does what we call the learning needs analysis. The person who sits with the operations team, looks for where the problem areas are. How can training and learning help to solve these issues? And focus on, having the instructional designers build the training pack, finding the qualified trainers, updating the competency matrix and looking at the curriculum, what needs to be changed, what needs to be updated. It's quite a package. So large companies tend to do it in-house, and they usually do it in-house with a mix of external learning providers. External learning providers can often make your life much simpler, especially if you are a small organization. What you want to look for if you're outsourcing is a reputable company, somebody with a good reputation. And by this, I don't just mean they've got some really big names that they've hired to present some trainings for them, but people that really approach it with a structured approach. They work with a competency matrix. They can tell you clearly what the person will learn, what they'll be able to do, what they'll be able to share with their team, what they'll be able to, how their behavior will change. Something that's interactive in nature. And this is one of the adult learning principles, is adults like things that are hands-on. They like things that they can learn right away. They like things that they can adapt. With COVID, whether it's virtual but interactive, it just can't be passive. They can't just be watching a slideshow, and some type of measurable results. So there's money that goes into this. There's people's time. When people aren't producing and they're in training, this is all time. You want something that they can measure with the Kirkpatrick model, for example. So that's my slides. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Christina. We're going to just push a poll to the group, and I'm going to keep. I've only got one question for you in the interest of time, so that we can hear from Craig. How would you advise a research team within an academic setting to apply these learning principles?
So the easiest way would be to have that lab work in what's called good lab practices. Have them, that already sets them up to learn that discipline and rigor that Gail was also speaking about, in terms of being rigorous in how you do it, not, sort of modifying things on the fly, being disciplined in everything. It will help also with your tech transfer when you want to move into production. If you can't replicate it in your tech transfer, you've got nothing. So you've just wasted your time.
Okay, thank you. Maybe we can push Vanessa, we can push the poll results to everyone. So the question was, if you're an employer, how do you train your employees? And we've got 50% of people answered through an in-house program, and the other 50% answered a mix of in-house and outsourced. So there's nobody who's exclusively outsourcing their training, which makes sense, I suppose, I'm just going to, I'd just like to introduce Craig Haslow, who's the Chief Scientific Officer at CellCAN. He's going to present to us addressing the skills gap in CGT manufacturing, crafting the future. So thank you, Christina, and welcome, Craig.
Thank you so much, Bob, and excellent presentation so far, everyone. It's been fantastic to see how this is all coming together nicely, and really the focus is truly overlapping. I think we're seeing a lot of the same shifts in culture and in training that we're really starting to design what the future of training should look like. And I mean, it's true, we do have a little ways to go yet. But first of all, thank you to everyone, TMM and the organizers, for giving us a chance to present and talk to you a little bit more about the advanced training that we're putting together here. So I'd really like to start by emphasizing that there truly are significant gaps in the cell and gene therapy training and expectations. So you've heard a lot of this already. There's been some excellent offers that have been put together, and obviously a huge kudos goes out to our colleagues at the Stem Cell Network for all the outstanding training opportunities that they've been delivering over the years. But really, those of us who've been responsible for onboarding numerous recruits for the on-the-floor manufacturing operations and those positions, we know this all too well. We get excellent candidates that have outstanding academic records, but when it comes to specific on-the-job training, there is quite a large gap that remains a need to be filled. So we at CellCAN decided that we were going to take to the road and really get interactive with the crowd and get some real-time feedback on this. And so at the 2019 International Society for Cell and Gene Therapies regional meeting in Madison, Wisconsin, we set out to capture data on exactly this phenomenon. We hosted a joint presentation session between CellCAN and the ISCT Early Stage Professional Committee, the ESP. So that's professionals within 10 years after their last most advanced degree. And really what we found was some quite startling results. It seems there's a gap in perception and a gap in really how people are ready for their either first or next role within the sector. So we had over 100 participants that participated in our live polling session, which was delivered entirely in a polling format. And we asked them to identify as either an early stage professional or as an employer. And we asked questions such as, do you require substantial formal training when hiring for a position? We asked that of employers. Or did you receive formalized training in cell and gene therapies prior to seeking your first position in the field? And certainly, 68% of employers said that formalized training was indeed required, but only about a third of ESPs had admitted to receiving any form of formalized training. So clearly, we would think of this as being an opportunity that's missed and perhaps a need that we have to create an offer for. But perhaps what was even more startling was when we asked HQP if they were qualified and proficient for their positions. About nearly a quarter of ESPs responded that yes, indeed they were when they started their job, but only 3% of employers reported that their HQP are qualified and proficient. So this really is a major gap in understanding and knowing what the expectations are. You can imagine that this has some safety and quality implications for products that are coming out into the clinic. Now, keeping focused on the idea of proficiency and how long it takes to reach proficiency and autonomy. Autonomy being really where you're an independent worker, you're not in job shadowing mode, and you really are able to be a productive HQP with individual tasks that you have to execute upon. So when we asked, how long do you feel it takes you to reach proficiency, about 40% of the ESPs reported that they've reached proficiency and autonomy within 3 months of hiring. But employers reported that only 10% of new recruits are reaching it within that time frame. And hopefully you can see from the legend below, indeed, even almost a quarter of employers said it does take up to 12 months for their HQP to reach a level of autonomy. So this is kind of echoing a lot of what we've heard, especially from Gail and from Christina, but it is certainly a startling finding, and it tells us a little bit that perceptions and expectations just aren't in alignment. So with this knowledge in hand, we performed a fairly extensive market research study. We reviewed over 450 training programs across the globe, and what we found was there was no consistent level of standardized training, certainly in North America, but even more so in Canada. Now, by consistent level of standardized training, I mean learning procedures that are common to producing therapies for patients, whether it be adequate pipetting techniques, aseptic techniques and sterile handling of products, and even just following standard operating procedures, which are quite complicated, as you've heard alluded to already in the presentations. So this does indeed create a bit of a therapeutic product quality concern, perhaps even a lack of consistency. And you can envision this within a situation where you've got a CAR T product that has a decentralized manufacturing model. So the manufacturing takes place at more than one site for the same product. Now, of course, if the HQP aren't trained exactly the same way, showed the exact same level of proficiency and qualification testing, then you might end up with a different product. In our field, as so many of you have heard, the process is the product. And that reigns true for just about every therapeutic product that you could think of. So really, what we also found were there are very few proven cell and gene therapy GMP training programs. Those that are either newly created or those that are existing typically have a very limited capacity. So the number of HQP that can get trained, become proficient before they reach the floor of manufacturing is quite limited, more or less across the board. And of course, this is really to serve as a reminder that there always is and will be a continuum of HQP that require advanced training. So it's regulatory mandated. Those of you that have some knowledge on the GMP regulations would understand that an adequate GMP training program is actually a mandated critical element. In fact, if you are subject to an inspection, here in Canada, it's the ROEB, we like to call them the inspectorate coming, they'll even give you a pre-populated list of questions and topics that they want to focus on. And that always contains training. So effectively, it's mandatory that updates to employees' training files are made. And in fact, you have to justify how you've qualified your training program and how you can show that everyone within your company exceeds expectations and passes the critical testing elements to show that they're qualified. So this applies to, as I mentioned, onboarding of new recruits, but certainly if there's retraining of HQP, say from prior GMP experience, you can imagine something like monoclonal antibody production and being transferred over to the cell and gene therapy manufacturing field. Now, we can really emphasize the need and the ongoing personnel that are requiring training when you think about physicians continuing professional development and CME credits. So the physicians have a requirement as part of their licensing to receive advanced training and continually update their file. And indeed, that's managed by an individual company. So it's very similar to what a learning management system could offer in terms of delivering an employee's training profile and keeping that on hand in case of audit. So the current state of onboarding is it's fairly arduous, and finding qualified workers, as has been alluded to already, is extremely difficult. Here in Canada, we often will seek trained employees from elsewhere around the globe that have GMP-specific training, whether it be from countries like India or Ireland, certainly in the UK. And we've found across the board, people admit the onboarding process usually takes over 8 months, and many people report it taking even a year. It really depends on the individual HQP and even what their role may be. So at that point, most often autonomy is not reached. So despite what our preconceived notions may be, our perception of how well we're doing on our jobs, our employers aren't finding that we are independent, that we don't rely as much upon our supervisors. And so it is a bit taxing from an organizational perspective. So when the training is delivered, it really is delivered by the current staff force that's within each site. And that is very taxing overall. And you can imagine if you wrap in all the costs around that, it can exceed over $100,000 when you think about employee salaries and supplies. So this really is something that has to be changed. So at CellCAN, our efforts are focused around the initial phases of the onboarding process to de-risk the overall training process. And it's this foundational knowledge and job-specific skills that include exposure to equipment that HQP will be using on a regular basis that we know it'll have the greatest impact when we design training around that. So, of course, the pandemic poses specific new challenges for all of us. However, it actually fits well within our approach to using computer-assisted learning and gamification to deliver an impactful virtual training environment. So we really see this as being the next phase of the advanced training offers that are out there. But quite importantly, what we'd like to do is make sure that we give HQP an environment where they can actually, they can fail. They can be exposed to common failure modes, whether it be with equipment or handling techniques, but allow them to do that in a virtual environment that doesn't impact the product that comes out the door. And so the types of training that we can deliver this around, we like to call it the funnel model. So you can imagine for biologics and pharmaceuticals at large, it really impacts more the broad to core GMP type of training, whereas cell and gene therapy training really covers the entire gap all the way down to project-specific training. And of course, as we remain towards the top of the funnel, more participants can take place and gain that foundational knowledge. So we truly are laser focused on the talent development. At CellCAN, we have 2 e-learning products that are being launched next month. Please look out for them. One is a global overview, the essentials of GMP for advanced therapy medicinal products in under 60 minutes, which is kind of more of an executive level type of talk. And certainly our very popular hands-on GMP workshop, which has been outstanding in terms of delivery and in terms of demand from everyone. There's actually a significant wait list that was generated from our hands-on component and had tremendous support from our friends at Stem Cell Network who've constantly helped get HQP trained through this type of curriculum. The second offer is the critical elements of GMP to bring your research to the clinic, and that's very much our online version of the hands-on GMP workshop. So when the pandemic ceases a little bit, we'll certainly be focused again on the hands-on delivery of elements within that GMP curriculum. But the strategies that we're employing also allow us to sort of move away from as much in-person time and deliver as much content as possible through an e-learning format. So please keep an eye out for additional advanced offers coming from CellCAN and in a great collaboration that we have across the board. And I think I'll just leave it there for now and get into the discussion mode. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Craig. Excellent presentation. Look, I think we've got a few more poll questions to send out to the audience. So we'll send out those surveys now. And I've got a couple of questions for you, but I just thought since the next segment is Q&A, we'll just blend these questions into some broader questions. One of the questions that I had for John earlier, I realize could be actually applicable to every presenter here today. So let me start with my presentations to you, Craig, my questions to you.
Certainly.
Don't worry, we're done with the presentation. So, look, training new recruits to produce life-saving or life-changing therapies seems like it could expose a lot of pressure and risk to ensure that the HQP are onboarded to a high enough standard that they don't make costly or dangerous mistakes. I mean, people's lives are at stake, right? So, how can training and how can CellCAN really help reduce risk when it's a lot easier said than done? How do you do it?
That's a great question. So I think the first to answer that in the first part, I can give you a bit of an analogy. So when we train commercial pilots are trained on effectively failures across the globe. Their scenarios are recreated where a crash has happened, and pilots are given the type of training to see what can they do differently to avoid disaster effectively. We can take these types of principles and even work with some of the companies involved in that to deliver this virtual type of environment that's de-risked. So a step away from the actual hands-on manufacturing and create an environment where failures can happen. They're encouraged and we learn from them all, including each other's mistakes in real time or in virtual space. You can imagine if you're faced with a new piece of equipment like the Miltenyi Prodigy, for example, for CAR T manufacturing, the goal has always been this bedside manufacturing concept. But in order for all of us to be qualified and basically producing a therapeutic in the same way, you need to be exposed to what types of failures you could see on that piece of equipment and know how to get around it. Then that also separates HQP from taxing their supervisors. If they already know what's happening and perhaps a way around that problem, then basically we've got the best, most qualified HQP possible, really, at that point.
Thank you. It's interesting that you took the aviation analogy. Having done some private pilot's license training, one of the most terrifying moments I ever faced in training was when you go to 3,000 feet and then the instructor shuts off the engine and you have to go through startup procedures while your engine is off and you're that close to the ground. So very good answer. Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Just another question here. You described large gaps in perception of preparedness for development of a work-ready staff force. How is it we've come so far and such gaps are not properly addressed?
Well, I think that's an excellent question, and really you alluded to it very much at your intro, where demand is outpacing supply right now in capacity. So we're somewhat victims of our own successes. We've really been focused on preparing for the early phases, right? Everyone wants their products and the projects they're working on to get into clinical production. But in order to get, over that hurdle, really what's happened in our field is silos kind of go up. People obviously are cognizant of intellectual property. And a lot of times that really is in sort of the trade secrets or the secret sauce, right? How you prepare a product. As I mentioned, the process is the product. So silos have been created whether we realize it or not. And what we really need to understand is there are so many commonalities in the way that we work within a GMP environment. So the workflow under aseptic conditions, just even basic handling procedures of whatever cell type you're working with, right? I know Stem Cell Network had an excellent session on iPSC, whether it's mesenchymal stromal cells or even primary cells. So I have a lot of work on pancreatic islets, for example. Sharing the basics and the foundational knowledge and training people on those sets us to a common level of base training, so we all have an understanding of what the expectations are and how to do things with, I guess, minimal variation and minimal error, really. So we really want to remove that element of learn by fire, right? And really deliver that element of efficient knowledge uptake by giving people a chance to have that safe space to try and try again until you get it right. Yeah. And really, using some of the advanced interactive and computer-assisted learning techniques, we can always check along the way how people are taking up the knowledge and making sure they retain it.
Great. Okay. Thank you very much, Craig. It's
my pleasure.
Excellent presentation, and thank you for your very complete answers to your questions. Maybe what we'll do now is we can open up the floor to the audience to see if there's. I would like to encourage anyone listening right now to if you've got any questions, I believe you can enter them in the bottom part, the Q&A, the bottom part of your screen. But otherwise, maybe what we can do is I do have that one question that was for John. I'd like to start off with that, and but it's really I realize it's intended for everyone, which is what can a person do to prepare themselves for a career outside of academia? And I'd like to start with John, but then maybe we can go around the horn and just see how you guys feel, and let's see where we can go with that as a starting point. Okay.
Sure. I don't know if you can see me or not, but so I think for a role outside academia, there's many different roles. That's the first thing to acknowledge. I mean, we've talked largely about industry here, but there's roles in NGO, government. There are lots of different things you can do here. But I think the major thing that you can do is inform yourself. First of all, do a really good survey of what the roles are that are available, what actually interests you. Difficult to, I think throughout everyone's careers, you're faced with those choices of, when you're young and you have to make decisions about what to do at university or, as your degree, it's difficult. You choose things. Sometimes you have a guiding light that you follow, but a lot of people don't. They kind of default into something and then move through and see what interests them. But it is worth doing your informed background research here. Talk to people. And this then comes back to networking, establish connections with people at events like this, Obviously, there is an opportunity at this event. Virtual is slightly more different than the in-person events that we're used to at TMM, but there's still the opportunity there. And indeed, Zoom brings many opportunities to make close connections with people and develop those. So use the resources that are open to you. You're in, many of the trainees will be in academic institutions, and there is a lot of expertise there. You've got supervisors, you've got committee members, there's people who are working in admin, in the tech transfer office, across the board in academia that can offer you some insights. Many of them have had prior roles outside of academia, and they will have some good things to say there. Connect with people, participate in community initiatives. If there's an opportunity to volunteer for things, do that. It's a really great way of meeting people. Don't forget that there's many of your peers who will be useful connections as well. Some of them will have moved out of the lab and into other careers, and you'll be able to talk to them and try and sort of get some insights there as well. Clearly, there's training opportunities that you need to undertake SCN, and as we've just heard from CellCAN, there's opportunities there. There's some great opportunities from our other partners as well that you should be aware of, BioCAN RX and others. So, take the time, use those opportunities wisely. There's no cost associated with these training opportunities apart from your time and dedication, and that is anticipated. And, there's a lot of online opportunities now. COVID has changed many things. Obviously, we're virtually meeting now, but the workshops that we are providing ourselves have been online workshops. And I suppose that's going to continue for at least the first half of next year, probably, who knows, but that's certainly where it's looking. But at some point there will be opportunities to have in-person meetings again. But there's plenty of project management introductions that are available by organizations like Coursera, etc. So there's plenty to do there. And the other thing that I would say about the training is you're going to do this training during your, do this training, but practice what you learn. Don't file and forget it. Keep it running. Keep it as something that you're interested in, and use it as a springboard to move forward.
Thank you, John. Gail, can I ask, how do you feel? What do you think people can do to prepare for a career outside of academia?
Yeah, I'd echo a lot of what John just said, and I think it's really do your research to know what you're getting into. If you think that you want to work in a GMP field, you really won't know until you're in the position what it's like. So the more research you can do and talking to people out there and ask them what they do on a day-to-day basis. And because once you get into the facility, and like everyone has talked about, we have to invest a lot to get people trained. So if you're not liking the position and the world of GMP and manufacturing, you're not going to be happy, and nobody's going to be happy, and it's not great for the products in the end. So I would just say, do your research and know what you're getting into if you think this is for you.
Christina, thank you, Gail. Christina, do you have any thoughts on that? What can a person do to prepare themselves for a career outside of academia?
I think the two answers were quite good. I think networking with people in the industry, looking for internships, looking at small labs, using things like the MyTax grants, where you have small companies who will hire students to come and do just, piecemeal, but it gives you an exposure, especially GMP. The first time I walked into GMP, I had no idea what I was walking into. And it really is a completely different world, because you're looking at people who are creative and who have lots of ideas, and suddenly you're telling them now you must follow a very rigorous process. So people have to really learn to see if that's the world for them. And I think trying to get a foot in the door, even as an intern, even as an unpaid, stagiaire, it really makes a difference.
Thank you. Craig, anything to add?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, everybody's brought up some excellent points, and Gail, you and I probably have some of the most similarities in hearing fans buzz in the background day and night, whether we're in the GMP facility or not. But ultimately, as John alluded to earlier, our field is starting to explode. So we're seeing startups unfolding all over. We're seeing new companies. We're seeing foreign investment coming into our country. This is prime opportunity. I think personally, especially if you're a trainee right now, don't hesitate to take on a sort of quote unquote adventurous role. Get some experience, get your hands wet, working in even a small team, a new company. Certainly if your ambitions are to go to a larger company, into pharma, don't hesitate to do that. There are easily transferable skills from academia and from the training that you're receiving, and we don't want to dilute that at all. But really, we need to sort of shift our mindset, perhaps especially within the country, towards the idea of stackable credentials, right? And I can most easily kind of present this to you with the idea that we're currently talking to a lot of academic leads, so PIs from academic projects, who are ready to launch their project into clinical production, right? So these, we often think of the PhDs that have their own lab, they're doing the work, but they're getting to a point in their career now where it's next step. You've been working on this project for so long. We want to get into patients. We want to launch clinical trials. They also need credentials stacked upon all of the training and experience that they've received. So it is the lifelong learning approach. It's a major one. And certainly, not every role you'll go into is sort of a quote unquote forever job. So the idea of career progression, so someone like myself or Gail could be on the floor manufacturing within a clean room environment, but perhaps you've got a passion for more of like the validation work and the quality team type of work. And you can see a path to get you out of the clean room and start working on the quality team. Well, you certainly want those appropriate credentials to stack upon the training and all the credentials you have, and then take your career further. And really, I mean, most of us look back on the work that we've done. I was fortunate. One day I got a cold call saying, do you want to start up this clinical pancreatic islet transplant program? We've got a brand new lab that's empty and you need to fill it. So you never know what opportunities lie ahead. And the networking aspect is so critical. When you see someone at a conference or what have you, just start asking them questions and you'd be amazed where it goes.
Every one of you has mentioned networking, which is quite interesting. And it is a small industry. So there's probably a good opportunity to get to know almost everyone in the industry, right? But Craig, you've moved from academia into startups, and you've been in both worlds quite a bit. Do you think, is there any element of like culture shock that you think?
Yes.
I wonder what your thoughts might be on that. And anyway, I'll come to my next question, which relates to John as well.
No, it's a really good point, because really often in academia, we might think of things being a little more lax. You've got your experiments to run to get you to your degree. But even in that, I mean, some of the best advice a friend gave me early on in my grad school studies was, treat it like a 9-to-5 job. And then you don't have to take as much work home with you. But it's kind of setting that expectation of like your routine work life, and how do you package that together? Because once you step out of grad school, if you do go to industry, you're dealing with the Gantt chart perspective, where there's projects that need to be done. Things have to be completed within very tight timelines. There's not a lot of wiggle room for overflow or things taking much longer beyond that. What you find when you get into more of the industry side of things is then, projects get chopped. You're told to basically halt all the work that you've been doing. We're not going to work on that anymore. And now everybody's going to focus on, the other task within the company. And that's very common. And it's something that maybe people should be aware of, the fact that, the dynamic, the changing environment you might be faced with. And then on the same token, you're trying to put a product out to market effectively and get through clinical trials. So you're going to be very narrowly focused on, one, maybe a couple of products as you work your way through that project in the clinical trial phases. So I think the focus does shift as you get to industry. And I can't say that there's one's better than the other. It's a little bit of like, what flavor do you prefer? And maybe at some point you want to change too. And there's nothing wrong with that. You can always transition back.
Okay, thank you very much for that. John and Gail, you guys mentioned there's a certain theme that you had in common. And John, you were talking about the trend, when you were talking about the trends, you mentioned, moving from careers to, from qualifications to careers. And you mentioned one thing, which was business acumen, okay? And I just wanted to ask, and it's a question to first to you and then also to Gail, what soft skills do you think that GMP employees need and are not coming out of academia with? I think you're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, I think this is a good question, and I'm certain that Gail will be able to give a more rigorous answer than I. So I'll only touch on a few things, but I think ability to write coherently and precisely, so communicate with the relevant numeracy and literacy within the field, I think is very important. The way of developing SOPs, etc. Those are things can be applied within labs. You see that occasionally happening, and more so as health and safety rules mandate it. But often it can be a little bit more flexible in laboratories, for better or worse, academic laboratories. And I think having the understanding, the rigor, and indeed Gail led our best practices workshop with Rebecca Davies as well, and that was a fantastic introduction to some of the rigorous processes that you need in terms of developing good documentation and etc. that are standards that are required. And I'm going to hand it over to Gail because she's going to be able to say a lot more than I am.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I guess I don't want to make it sound like people from academia don't have the right soft skills. Because it comes down a lot to personality too. Some people, and I always say, some people belong in GMP and some people don't. And you can teach technical skills. You can get people to get better at their aseptic training and better at pipetting. But it's hard to tell somebody get better with your personality. So you get GMP better, right? Because it is just true. Like, some people just don't fit and they hate it, and they say they hate it. So that's the first thing I would say is don't try and fit a square peg in a round hole if you're not cut out for it. It's okay. Go find something else. But I think one of the things you have to think about is you're making a product that's going to go into people. So you always have to do the right thing, even when no one's looking. Like, you're in that clean room by yourself and you have to follow that procedure. And if you made a mistake, you got to come clean and you got to tell somebody about it and you got to document it. It's going to be there for 25 years. But it's important that you actually write it down and you let quality assurance know. And there's going to be a big investigation. And you gotta have the to do that. The other thing is organization, good documentation, willingness to say, I don't know, I don't understand this. How can I do this better? It's continual improvement. So I think it's all wrapped up in that, in being able to work in a GMP facility. And you don't know sometimes till you're in it.
Yeah, that's true.
Can I just add something to what Gail said? So I agree with everything you said, Gail, and I think it also comes up to the organization around the person. Is the person, if they come forward and say, I made a mistake, how will they be treated? And I think that speaks volumes of, will people come up and bring those issues to the surface, or will they feel that, you know what, it might actually be better that I just say nothing, because either way, it's going to be terrible for me. So yeah. I think that it has a lot to do, because it is a huge behavioral shift for people.
Yeah,
I imagine
it's a culture shift.
Yeah. I imagine that's quite a challenge. One, you've got an environment where you really, really don't want people to make mistakes. And on the other hand, you really, really want transparency so that when mistakes happen, they've got to be up at the surface. And that's a huge human challenge in any business. How do you cope with that balance? I guess, like you say, manage an environment where people can come forward and not be crushed for making a mistake, right?
I think it all comes down to, in the end, you're producing a safe product for patients. So you have to make sure everyone's all on the same team. Like I said, in a GMP facility, no one has a small role. The person cleaning the floors is just as important as the person that's making the product. And you're all in it together. And so everybody wins when things are improved and there's a good product in the end.
And maybe perhaps I can just add one thing too. Like I agree 100% with what you're saying. And you know, we always work in our laboratory procedures with maximal efficiencies, right? So if you're in the lab running a gel, you want to do it as efficiently as possible. And often if you're starting, you look to the, whether it's a postdoc or someone who's doing their PhD or something like that, that streamline their processes to work efficiently. And certainly with the standard operating procedures, you have to follow the standard operating procedures, but that's not to say there isn't a mechanism where you can identify a more efficient way to work, right? Within GMP, there's always a way for continual improvement, and that's a critical part of GMP. It's just a matter of documenting it, outlining it, submitting it to the right department. You know, your quality team has to review it, your supervisors have to review it, and then you'll talk about it in a meeting session and go over the pros and cons. And if it's a meaningful, impactful change, then a new protocol gets written and the training has to begin on rolling that out to everyone. So there is a mechanism for that. It's more dynamic than it seems, but it just has more structure.
Just on that point, Christina had you had a slide where you were talking about how much you hate the check the box mentality, right? And you want to make sure that people avoid, running, you don't want to run afoul of the auditors. How does L&D help in that regard? I mean, if the auditors say something is to fix, then you know what to train, right? But on the other hand, I guess you want to stay ahead of the auditors. So
I mean, that's really working in close proximity with operations. It's really, I came from doing continuous improvement in operations to L&D because we saw a lot of the continuous improvements I was doing anyways with my team were always linked to learning. And so it's to look and say, where are the issues? What are you having? It's working hand in hand. As somebody just said, we're all one team. So it's not, it's basically looking, saying, this is the problem. Which part of this can I come in with my team and help on? And that's really a key thing. You can't have L&D sitting very far away in some type of, ivory tower, looking down saying, look, when you need something, send a smoke signal. You really have to be there on the floor. It really makes a huge difference because sometimes the problems are small. Sometimes they're organizational. Sometimes we like to think problems are training. Sometimes it's organizational. I can't disinfect my hands before I enter the zone if you didn't put up, a little thing to disinfect my hands with. It has nothing to do with training. It has to do with organization. So it's really working as a team in manufacturing. Everyone has a part to play.
Okay, thank you very much, Christina. Well, look, I think that's all the time that we've got today. I just want to thank everyone here, the Stem Cell Network, CellCAN's first two offers, by the way, are you can find them in the handout. I think that's been sent to all the participants. But special thanks to Till McCulloch Meetings for organizing this. And guys, this is a really enlightening conversation. I think I'll be quoting all of you guys in my final paper. So thanks very much.
Thank you, Bob. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Bob. Thank you, everyone. It's been great.
Bye-bye.